John Powers is a novelist, playwright, humorist, teacher, and business person. His musical comedy, Do Black Patent Leather Shoes Really Reflect Up?, is running today in over 40 cities across the United States. John has written 3 books, all of which have sold over 1 million copies. His 4th book, The Junk Drawer, Corner Store, Front Porch Blues, sounds like a song title, has just been published. In addition, John has received 2 Emmy Awards for his work in television. He's also the co-founder and president of the Powers of Motivation Institute. John has been a guest on many national television shows, including Donahue, Today, and Oprah, and holds a PhD in communications from Northwestern University. Okay, he's here to help us discover that even sparrows can soar. So please give a warm roundtable welcome to John Powers.
Thank you. I've had to follow tough acts before. But never 3 days of them. As I'm speaking to you this morning, if it appears that I'm getting shorter, that's not an optical illusion. I have a bad back. And those of you who have this problem know that doctors don't know anything about backs. The last one I went to told me I should sleep with a pillow between my knees, and I did. And oddly enough, it really helped my back. Just about broke my neck keeping my head on that pillow, but it really... Whenever it's mentioned I've been on Oprah, inevitably someone will ask, gee, what's Oprah Winfrey really like? Actually, she's very different than you might imagine. She's a short, thin white woman. Now, I'm a product of the Midwest. I grew up in Chicago. That's great, I need a ride home. But I was really lucky because I had wonderful parents. And as you know, that's most of the battle. When I was a child, my parents had an agreement. They would never go to bed mad at one another, which made it rather tough on us kids. Not easy talking to someone who hasn't slept in 14 years. And an older sister who was one of these children who at school was Miss Perfect, but at home she was an older sister. To give you an idea what this child was like, one Saturday morning we're watching a science fiction movie on television. And right after the movie's over, my older sister convinces me that I'm a test tube baby. And then she did something mean, dropped a glass on the floor, told me it was my real mother. But one of the greatest things about living in my house is my grandfather lived with us. My grandfather was a teacher. He drove a bus for the city of Chicago, but he did that for the money. He was a teacher. And one of the things he taught us, even when we were children, is that we are all teachers all the time, even when we don't want to be. We are teaching everyone around us who we are and what we believe life is all about. I learned that a few years ago when my older daughter was almost 3. One morning I had to go to the cleaners, but when I went to the back door, it was raining outside, and I saw my wife's car in the driveway, and even though the cleaner was a block away, I thought I'd take her car. But I must have lost my mind momentarily because I didn't ask her permission first. I just presumed she wasn't going anywhere in the next 75 seconds. But sure enough, when I pull back into the driveway, there's my wife on the back porch. Her arms are folded and her foot is tapping. And my daughter's standing next to her, and her arms are folded. And her foot is tapping. And as I opened the door, my daughter said to me, "Daddy, ever occur to you to take your own damn car?" Gee, I wonder where she heard that. I was the youngest child in my family for 5 years until my brother came along, and just like that, I went from being the main event to the opening act. I don't think I've ever really adjusted. And I had a wonderful opportunity to be a teacher to him, but for reasons I'll never fully understand, I passed them up. When he followed me around, I'd lose him. When he wanted to play with me, I'd tell him he was too young, and why he wanted to be like me, I don't know. He was different in certain ways. He liked mechanical things. When he was about 2.5, he discovered the junk drawer. Too short to see him, but tall enough to open it, stand there and rattle it back and forth. Liked to hear that junk move around. And if Ma or Dad walked by, they'd pick him up and let him look in. And his eyes would widen, and he'd run his fingers through that junk. When he and I got older, every day we'd go to the corner store together because we'd usually argue over whose turn it was, and my solution was to send us both. I grew up in a neighborhood, so the corner store was on the corner where it should be. You know the kind, if I brought a note for cigarettes, Mr. Connors, who owned the store, he'd know if that was my dad's handwriting. If I was a few pennies short, he'd say, "Oh, bring it next time." But I'd have to remember because he wouldn't. And if I tried to buy a candy bar before supper, he'd say, "I don't think so." Mr. Connors was a teacher too. And on warm summer nights, my grandfather, my brother, and me, we'd get our candy bars, and we'd go back and sit on the front porch, which was really nothing more than a stoop. And every time we sat down, my grandfather would say the same thing. "Wow, what a view! You can see the world from here." And I believe he could. And my brother and I would sit there and talk about all the wonderful things we were going to do with our lives. And my grandfather, being the wise man that he was, would just listen. My grandfather taught me common sense. When I was 17, went out to buy my first used car, he taught me how. He said, "You get in that car, kid, you turn on the radio, and you push in the buttons. If they land on rock stations, buy another car." He had a plaque over his bed. "Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and a red Ferrari." My grandfather was a religious man, and one day when my brother and I were in our teens, driving him a bit too crazy, he sat us down at the kitchen table and he took out the Bible. And he said, "The beauty of the scriptures is not so much what is written, but what is read." And he read the passage where Abraham is asked to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. And when he finished, my grandfather said, "Now, if you know how to read the scriptures, you realize that Isaac was 12 years old or younger." I said, "Where does it say that?" He said, "Well, if he'd have been a teenager, it wouldn't have been a sacrifice." My grandfather drove a bus, as I mentioned, for the city of Chicago during the rush hour traffic. And if it was your second time on the bus, he knew your name, the name of your husband or wife, your children, where you worked, where you lived, how you spent your weekends. He knew you. And people would actually pass up other buses to get on his. It was a moving party. And 35 years later, after I've spoken about him in public, people come up to me and they say to me, I remember your grandfather. I used to ride on his bus. He was the highlight of my day. What a wonderful way to be remembered as the highlight of everyone's day. One of the things my grandfather used to tell us sitting on that front stoop is that there's a first time and a last time for everything. And when you truly believe that, you appreciate all the moments that much more in between. He would tell us, when you sit down at the kitchen table tonight, you look at those faces around you, you cherish that moment. There was a first time, and there will surely be a last. When I became a teacher, my very first day, I came home and I said to my grandfather, you know, what's the job of a teacher? And my grandfather said, the purpose of an educator, whether they're in the classroom, whether they're in business, or whether they're driving a bus, the purpose of an educator is to bring joy into the lives of others through learning. If you can teach them to learn, to love to learn, if you can teach them that the only constant in life is change, and that you embrace that change as opportunity rather than push it aside as a problem, if you can teach them that, then your job is done. My grandfather believed that life was learning and learning was life. You should always be getting better at something. And his own life was an example. In the last days when he was in and out of nursing homes, he was studying Russian. And one day when I went to visit him, even I learned something. I'm walking down the hall and I'm just going by this old lady's room, and this very old man comes out of nowhere, shoves me aside and walks into her room. And she's sitting there at a desk writing something. And the old man stands right in front of that desk. He says, hey, stop what you're doing and guess how old I am. She said, I'm very busy. I don't have time. Hey, nothing's that important. Come on, take a shot. How old do you think I am? She said, fine. Take off all your clothes. He said, what? She said, take off all your clothes. So he takes off all his clothes. She said, now turn very slowly to the right. Now turn very slowly to the left. Now face me. You're 92 years old. He said, that's right. How did you know? She said, you told me this morning at breakfast. In the past few years, I have studied humor, and all that study only told me what my grandfather's life had shown me, and that is that humor, enjoying life, having a lust for laughter, is the largest source of positive energy in our lives, and yet it's the source that's most often overlooked. Why? Because humor has a bad reputation. Walk around with a frown on your face and people will think you are thoughtful and perceptive. Walk around with a smile and they'll think you're either an idiot or up to no good. And I've noticed a lot of you are up to no good, so. And when I talk about a sense of humor, I don't mean just telling a joke or laughing at one, though that's a nice part of it, but someone with a sense of humor every day maximizes the impact of the good things in their lives and minimizes the effects of the bad. We all get both. Each one of us gets around 3,500 messages a day. We can't absorb all those. There's a group of nerves in the back of our neck called the reticular activating system. And all those nerves do is filter out the messages that are not important to us. So if you're one of those people who sees nothing but negativity in your life, that's truly what you see, because those are the messages you're choosing. But if you're someone who sees joy and love, compassion everywhere you look, that's because that's truly what you want to see. One of the ways we cheat ourselves out of having a lot of fun is by prejudging people, sticking labels on them because they're a certain height or a certain color or a certain sex. That expected behavior. There's a lot of talk about discrimination today, and it all boils down to one thing: expected behavior. I've met someone like you before, so I know who you are. When the reality is there's never been anyone like you. Each one of us is a once-in-a-universe happening. The problem is that this labeling starts very young, quite often in school. I remember when I was in 3rd grade, they had these reading groups. The really smart kids were the Cardinals. Those were the children who cried on Saturday morning because they couldn't go to school. Those were the ones that made the rest of us sick to our stomachs. And then there were the B students, the Bluebirds, who weren't quite as smart as the Cardinals, but then after all, they had a personality. And then there were the C students, the Robins. When I taught, I loved to call on Robins. And if you're a Robin, I'm sure you remember this. What Robins do is they sit in their desk and they line their head up with the head in front of them. And wherever that head goes, they go. Have a whole row of Robins, it's like watching a chorus line. And then there was my reading group, the D students and less, the Sparrows. The Cardinals, the Bluebirds, the Robins, the Sparrows. Halfway through the year, the teacher made up a special reading group just for me. The Droppings. And every day you behave that way because you were treated that way. And you were treated that way because you behaved that way. And you behaved that way because you were treated that way. I remember the very best day I ever had in elementary school. It was in 4th grade. The teacher put an arithmetic problem on the board and no one could get the right answer. She's calling on all the heavy hitters, the Cardinals, the Bluebirds. They don't know the answer. So she's getting desperate now. She's even calling on some Robins. They don't know the answer either. The Sparrows don't even know it's an arithmetic problem. Of course, all the time I'm over there waving my hand like a madman. And every now and then she'd look over and give me a pathetic sneer and call on somebody else. And after she had called on everybody else, she looked over at me and said, "Well, Mr. Powers, Mr." Whenever a teacher didn't like you, it was always Mr. Even if you were a girl. "Well, Mr. Powers, what do you think's the correct answer?" And I calmly stood up and said, "The correct answer is 17. She was astounded. She said, well, that's correct. The answer is 17. But she was hardly about to compliment me. She said to the class, "Well, if even Mr. Powers can get the right answer, if even that guy knows what's going on, what's wrong with the rest of you?" She went on that way for at least 10 minutes. But somewhere during that monologue, she and I became friends. Finally, she looked over and said, "John?" "Yes, Margaret?" "Would you mind explaining to the rest of the class how even you got the right answer?" I said, "Not at all." And I proudly stood up and I walked to that blackboard. I pointed to that problem and said, "I guessed." ever notice, by the way, that cardinals use words the rest of us just read? A few months ago, I gave a talk to a group of people, and afterward, a teacher came up to me with cardinal written all over her. She said, you know, I have this ruffian in my class. Ruffian? Isn't that what you eat to avoid colon cancer? Humor does so many wonderful things for you. First of all, every time you smile, every time you laugh, you are thinking better. You are thinking creatively. You are making connections between points in a relationship you didn't see before, and that's what creative thinking is. You know when you have a problem, the answer is out there. Your mind must feel free to go out and find it. A composer, when he or she writes new music, they don't literally create new notes. They simply organize the old ones in a way no one's thought about before. Humor takes the stress out of you. You ever been in such pain that you laugh and then you cry and then you laugh? That's humor's way, that body's way of pulling you back to being mellow. Ever see someone talk in public and they get nervous and they giggle? It's the body's way of saying, hey, mellow out. Professor Mary Eisen at the University of Maryland has conducted studies that show when you're in a good mood, you organize information better than you ordinarily would, and therefore you solve your problems better than you ordinarily could. And research at the University of Tennessee has shown that when you negotiate, if you share a joyous moment with that other person, perhaps a joke, perhaps just nice, light conversation, both of you will be happier with the results of that negotiations than you would have ordinarily been. Why? Because humor is the common ground that pulls us together. We're the only species on earth that has it. I think that's because we're the only ones who really need it. Humor makes you a better communicator. We live in a world of communications, and humor does two wonderful things for your message. It demands attention, and it makes the message memorable. If I say to you, where's the beef? A commercial pops into your head that's easily 15 years old by now. When I was in high school, I had a teacher who used humor. Not intentionally, but he used it anyway. His name was Crazy Eddie. He taught driver education. Carried a ruler with him. Must have been a frustrated nun. And one day I'm behind, I can say that by the way, I'm Catholic. At least I was when I began this. Maybe a call from the Pope waiting for me. One day I'm in driveretta behind the wheel, and I thought I stopped at the stop sign. But as I start up, Crazy Eddie starts with that ruler. He starts poking me. Says, hey, Powers, you didn't stop at the stop sign. I said, well, sir, I really slowed down. The sign didn't say slow down. The sign said stop. I said, well, sir, slow down, stop, not a real big difference. He said, hold out your hand. Started hitting it with the ruler. He says, now, do you want me to slow down or do you want me to stop? But that year I also had a teacher. Actually, he was more than a teacher. He was a wizard. His name was Mr. Bindle. World history teacher, toughest teacher in the school. And all I wanted to do that first quarter was pass. That's all I wanted to do. In my school, we didn't get letter grades. We got straight percentages. And all I wanted was 70%. We'd get our report cards. I open it up, I race across to the world history grade, and there it is in little black numbers. 96%. My head is spinning. 90s. Well, there were quarters when you could add up all my grades. Now, unless you've been a Sparrow, you don't know how I felt that day. For 10 years, I went somewhere where I was expected to fail. And every day I completely succeeded. But that day, I felt tall. I felt proud. For the first time, I didn't take the long way home on report card day through Cleveland. Now, I knew luck had played a role here somewhere. I must have guessed right on every one of those multiple choice questions. But I made up my mind that one way or the other, I was going to keep that 96%. Second quarter, 94%. Third quarter, 97%. And the fourth quarter final grade that I received in world history was 98%. Okay. Unlike my father, you didn't pass out, so after Mr. Bindle had handed out the report cards, we're getting ready to leave. He said, Mr. Powers, I'd like to see you after class. There are certain phrases that a sparrow can live an entire lifetime and never miss. And right at the top is, I'd like to see you after class. We sparrows have a strategy. When you have to talk to a teacher, what you do is you talk long enough so that by the time you finish, that teacher has died of natural causes. So I go up there and I said, hi, Mr. Bindle. Boy, Mr. Bindle, you're surprised about the grades I got, huh? Mr. Bindle, I bet that first quarter really surprised me. Mr. Bindle, Mr. Bindle, I think the Cubs are going to do this shit like a week in the outfit. They can use no apple shortstop. Looks like rain later this afternoon. 90% chance of... And somewhere along the line, Mr. Bindle said something to me that the teachers don't often say. Oh, they think it. They just don't often say it. Mr. Bindle said to me, shut up. So I did. He said, actually, Mr. Powers, the only quarter that did not surprise me was the first quarter when you got 96%. Because it was a mistake. You were supposed to get 69%. But I accidentally reversed the numbers, putting them into the report card. And by the time I caught the mistake, we were 3 weeks into the next quarter. And by then I had noticed a change in you. You were paying attention. You were asking questions other than, may I go to the washroom? In other words, Mr. Powers, you acted like you deserved that 96%. So I just thought I'd let it go and see what happened. The point is, Mr. Powers, like virtually every student in this school who's not getting out of it what they should, you could do virtually anything you wanted to do the moment you believe that you can do it. We are all teachers. I call Mr. Bindle my wizard because a wizard gives you what you've already got. But you'd never have it unless the wizard gave it to you first. Doesn't make sense. That's why they're called wizards. And since each one of us is a teacher, we too can be wizards, giving to everyone around us, especially the children, giving them faith in themselves, through a pat on the back, a smile, an encouraging word, through friendship, through love. We are all teachers, but how often are we wizards? Sometimes the teacher becomes the student. I was teaching 8th grade one year, and I had this child in my class that I did not look upon as a sparrow. I looked upon him as a jerk. His name was William Wilson. He stood about this tall, weighed 12 pounds, 11 of it dirt. Dirt under his fingernails, greasy, slimy jeans. His boots were always dirty looking. He rarely came to class, and when he did, he didn't do anything. Didn't have any friends. He didn't seem to fit in. And I'm ashamed to admit that on certain days, I made his life a living hell. And when I talked to him one-on-one, he'd shrivel up right in front of me. His head would bow. His shoulders would curl in. He'd look down at his feet and do a nervous little dance, and he'd giggle. Gosh, Mr. Powers, I don't know why I didn't do my homework. You know, I sat here quite a while, but nothing happened. A jerk. One January day, I come out of school, and I get into my car. I turn the ignition, I hear nothing. For those of you who live in climates like Chicago, you know there's no louder sound on a January day than an ignition that makes no sound at all. Some of you are mechanically gifted. You'd find this to be a minor inconvenience. I'm not. I get out of the car, I don't know what to do. It's a typical January day in Chicago. 85,000 degrees below zero. And a cold front's moving in. I'm leaning against the car. I see this figure coming toward me across the parking lot, and it looks like William Wilson. But it can't be William Wilson because this guy's walking tall, the way John Wayne used to walk down Main Street. And William Wilson walked up to me and he said, having trouble with that car, Mr. Powers? His voice had gotten deeper, too. He said, having trouble with that car? I said, gosh, I don't know. I got in there, I turned the ignition. I sat there quite a while, but nothing happened. I said, get in the car. So I get in the car. And he walks to the front and he said, pop the hood. I'm reaching for everything. Finally, I pop the hood. And he flings it up, fiddles with something for a moment. And he said, turn it over. And of course, when I turned the ignition, the engine just roared up. And William Wilson slammed that hood down, gave it a nice gentle pat, the way John Wayne used to pat that holster. And William Wilson starts walking away, and he thinks better of it, comes over to the driver's side of the car, where I'm sitting there looking like the buffoon that I am. And William Wilson says to me, and what is this, a kid of 13, 14 years old? William Wilson said to me, you know, Mr. Powers, there's a lot more to life than what goes on in your 8th grade. And he walked across that parking lot into the sunset. And that night he went drinking with my father. But he had made his point. Just because someone is a fool in your world does not necessarily mean you would not be a fool in theirs. Part of the problem is we see just slivers of people, clients, employees, in my case, student, instead of that entire person, the mother or father, the brother or sister, the friend. We have to see the whole person if we want to get the most out of this life, if we want to have as much fun as we can have. I'd like to make a few quick suggestions that maybe you could incorporate into your life to make it just a little better. First of all, we should all try and smile a little more. When you smile, the rest of your body physiologically has to follow along, has no choice. It's got to go. You can be feeling crummy. Put a smile on your face, you'll feel better. Act like you're happy. And will you be dancing down the streets 10 minutes later? No, but at least you'll feel better. We should learn to enjoy the simple things in life because that's what life is. Spending time with the people you love, doing what you like to do. That's it. There's no more. If you try to be the highlight of everyone's day, you're going to be surprised how many people are the highlight of yours. We should learn to listen. Great listeners are rare, and everyone around them loves them. Besides, you never learn anything talking. I know, I talk for a living, and I haven't learned anything in years. Write little notes that matter to the people who matter to you. The moment will pass. The notes will be treasured. Do new things. Life is a rainbow. Why live only a few colors? If you're the kind of person who every day reads the Wall Street Journal, tomorrow read the National Enquirer. If nothing else, you'll get the news 3 weeks early. In fact, being aware of your sense of humor doesn't matter if it's good or bad. As long as you and your lover have the same sense of humor, you will greatly improve your love life. So if you're in bed and you're laughing together, that's a good sign. If only one of you is laughing, Humor even helps us communicate with children. Sometimes children need to hear the word no, but many more times you can redirect that energy in a more positive way just by dealing with them humorously. I know this because I have two daughters of my own. I have a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. Now, I know what a few of you are thinking as you look at that picture. You're thinking, boy, that guy looks a little old to have kids that young. Actually, it's a very good system. By the time they're old enough for college, I'll be dead. In fact, with children, they're very hard to fool. When my daughter was 3, the older one, I took her to McDonald's. I thought I'd have some fun with her. I said, do you have any money? She said, no. I said, then what are you going to eat? She said, I don't eat money. And the younger one's named Joy Victoria. Joy because we didn't know her very well at the time. And Victoria, because my wife loves everything Victorian. My wife pointed out to me that our child was even conceived in our Victorian home. Of course, if my parents thought that way, my name would be Buick. Now, I've been very lucky. I've had wonderful teachers in my life. My parents, my grandfather, even the guy at the corner store. And every now and then I go back to my old neighborhood, I guess in a way to get new lessons. It's the kind of neighborhood that never changes. And I went into a tavern called Max's, which has been there forever. Max is just cleaning up the bar. And there's these two fellows at the end of the bar. And this one fellow says to the other, you know, you look Irish. Are you Irish? The fellow says, well, actually, I'm from Ireland. The fellow says, well, that's a coincidence. I'm from Ireland, too. Where are you from in Ireland? And the fellow says, well, I'm from Waterford County. Waterford County. Now, that is a small world, you know. I lived in Waterford County. Where in Waterford County? And the fellow says, a small little town called Wexford. Wexford? I grew up in Wexford. Where in Wexford? The fellow says, well, a tiny little street called Chauncey Street. I was born on Chauncey Street. And just then another fellow walked in, sat down, ordered a beer. Said to Max, anything new going on, Max? And Max pointed to these two fellows and said, well, the O'Leary twins are drunk again. Thank you. As I grew older, even my younger brother became a teacher to me because, like my grandfather, he was a loving, giving, caring person. My brother was a tough kid, smoked Camels, not the cigarette. But one summer morning, I'm sitting in the living room. He's going out to his part-time job at the grocery store, and I said to him, hey, you forgot to make your bed. At that time, Ma had a thing about unmade beds. He said, I haven't got time. Can you do it for me? You would have thought he asked me to to pick up the house and move it 10 feet. I said, oh, not the bed. I hate making beds. I said, fine, I'll make the bed, but you owe me. He said, thanks, bye, and he walked out that door. And I never spoke to him again because he died a few hours later in an accident. And about 8 months after that, my parents sold the home that we had grown up in. And the next day, before the new people moved in, Ma sent me back to pick up some things that she had left behind. And as I walked through those rooms, knowing I'd never be back, I remembered what my grandfather used to say: there's a first time and a last time for everything. And since my brother's death, not a day of my life has gone by that I have not thought about him for at least a few moments, and of the moments that will never be. He never heard about my new job. He never drove my new car. He never saw my new apartment. And when there was someone I needed to talk to who was more than just a friend, there was no one. And he and I will never play those middle-aged games of basketball where you try to get the other guy to laugh harder so you can win. I knew then, as I know now, that as my parents grew older, he would not be there to help. And when my mother passed away 2 years ago, he was not there to share the grief. He and I will never sit at kitchen tables or walk to corner stores or sit on front porches and wonder where the years have gone. My grandfather used to say there's a first time and a last time for everything, but he was wrong. Sometimes you don't even get that. Each one of us, every morning that we awaken, we have before us this gift that we call life. And through our love of living and laughter and ourselves, we learn to unwrap that gift so that we can discover all the beauty and the excitement and the challenge that that gift holds for each of us. Only then can we share it with those around us, because you cannot give what you have not got. But especially, as my grandfather did, we must give it to the children. Our children, God willing, have ahead of them thousands of unspoiled days. They have lifelong friends they've yet to meet. And they will dance to love songs that have yet to be written. Through passion and love, they'll create another generation that will live to enjoy this earth. And they'll create another, and another, and another. And how joyously the journey is for all of them will be determined in large part by how joyously and lovingly we teach them how precious this gift of life is. Because each of us is a rock that sends ripples through generations. I'd like to wish you today what in many ways my brother's life wished me. May your days, like your junk drawers, be cluttered and filled with surprises. May there be a corner store on every block of your life. And may your dreams and the dreams of everyone you love, especially the children, may they always have a front porch view. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.